Hello, people. I'm Detroit Miracle. Yes, and indeed. Right now, I am here to have more cool comic book slash film slash character slash story fun. This particular topic will be about Superman. Duh, 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 duh. And I will also be characterizing Superman's power levels as characterized through various formats such as comic books, graphic novels, cartoon, animation, and live action films or TV programs pertaining to Superman. Okay, as many of us are well aware of, there is a lot of Superman material out there in many formats and platforms such as comic books, cartoons, and films, as well as various TV series pertaining to Superman. So there is no shortage of information pertaining to Superman. He's like, so in other words, he's the most popular superhero male. And Wonder Woman, of course, might be the most popular female superhero, in all fairness. But right now, we're talking about Superman entirely in terms of his power levels and his presence. Okay, in the comic books, Superman goes back decades, I believe, all the way to the 1950s or maybe even before that. So it isn't a brand new comic book in terms of Superman's. It's been around for many decades. And in the comic books, Superman's power levels were characterized as immense in terms of what he was shown doing based on the writer's interpretation of Superman having powers. So, comic book writers are of varieties. So, there were many writers that wrote for Superman in terms of stories, or there were a few, and they all wrote Superman differently in terms of power levels and the things that he can overall do and accomplish. So, in some comic book editions, Superman was shown to be so powerful that he could move a whole planet in terms of power levels, strength levels, and anything else that it would have took him to do that. But in that comic book issue, he did it of relative ease. He smiled and flew as he pushed it. He didn't have any problems lifting it. But in some other comic book editions, Superman is shown struggling to lift some immensely heavy objects that wasn't as heavy as the world or a world. So his power levels are set based on the imagination and design of the writers in the comic books, of course. So if you read Superman comic books that go back decades, it might confuse you in terms of his power levels being of various and varieties as characterized. But nevertheless, in the comic books, Superman has always been characterized as incredibly, immensely powerful and seemingly indestructible on many occasions. Superman is a Rocky Balboa type of character. Even if he meets something tougher than him, he could take punches and come back swinging and get the job done. In other words, but that is another story, of course. So, okay, the Superman in the cartoons sort of follows the Superman in the comic books in terms of look, scenery design, but the cartoon Superman isn't as powerful as the comic book Superman is. They always characterize Superman in the cartoons as being a bit weaker in comparisons to the comic book Superman. And in the live action characterizations of Superman, he has the comic book level powers and strength at that particular level. They never showed him move a planet or anything close to being that heavy in the live action, but based on their characterizations of Superman in terms of his powers, it sort of gets close to the comic book levels of Superman's characterization in terms of his sheer raw power, might, and strength. In other words, In the live action, he's incredibly versatile with his power, meaning he doesn't have like just one power that he has to depend on. He has many that he can rely on in his vast arsenal of powers. If you look up Superman powers and period, just look up everything he could do, you might see stuff on the list that he hasn't shown you in the comic books nor film. So it works like Superman could think of new powers and develop them if he cared enough to do so. So he might be able to develop endless amounts of powers as characterized in the live actions, the cartoons, and the comic books. So Superman's power levels too, they variety and vary in all of those different platforms because there have been different writers that wrote for Superman in those different platforms as well. So his powering levels always vary in variety in terms of sheer might, endurance, strength, durability, speed, energy projection, powers out of his eyes. So it's all up to the writer, in other words. And they've all did a spot on great job of characterizing Superman in all platforms in regards to the power levels in comparison. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in.